I have the extreme pleasure of getting to do this fireside chat with George. So this what it's called, I forget what the word is, description, is how I lost $26 million in real estate. So George is gonna tell us how he lost $26 million in real estate and still is up here with a smile on his face. So start from like the schematics, whatever, but before you lost the money, what was your business like? You had what, 4,000 units?
That's 4,000 units. So basically I had amassed about 4,000 units across the country over 12 years, had a net worth in the tens of millions, and then lost it all and ended up $26 million in debt in about 2 years. And what's notable is I made my money, I lost my money kind of doing the same thing. I took big risks on real estate deals and worked really, really hard to make them pay off, and generally they did. And then I took one which I thought may pay off, and it ended up backfiring and unwinding everything that I'd earned over the prior 12 years and then some.
It's insane. And you're still in real estate today. I mean, I don't know, if I lost $26 million, like I would end up like in a cave somewhere, probably still crying myself to sleep. So let's start with the beginning, right? Because you've pivoted your business a couple of times. When the original plan was, this was back in what, 2000-ish, is when you were towards your peak high?
Sure, I bought my biggest asset, which ended up being the one that helped unwind me, was 1,100 units, one of the largest apartment complexes in the country. It's called Woodland Meadows, or was called Woodland Meadows, in Columbus, Ohio. I bought it for $13.5 million at a bankruptcy court auction.
So what was it about that deal that made you be excited about it, right?
So I would buy, starting with my very first project my very first building was in 2002. It was 4 units. It was highly distressed in South Central Los Angeles. And basically, I would always look for the most distressed, most troubled properties, the ones that no one else wanted to buy, and I would buy those at big discounts and then turn them around. And that was really the ingredients to my success. And I would take
you like the dirty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's where
the one that no one else wants to touch.
That's where the rewards are, really. It's still that way today. It's that way throughout history. You buy the stuff that no one else wants. It's a big if you can turn it around, there's big rewards. If you fail, then there can be consequences.
So looking back now, right, throughout the process, what would you have essentially, because again, what happened, and we can get into this too, it was a little bit out of your control. Right, so start with how you grew from 0 to 4,000 before this all went down.
Sure. So I was an entrepreneur from an early age. I worked as a busboy when I was 13, and I saved that money and started a record company for my parents' garage. This was in the early '80s in Southern California. I did some local punk bands that I liked, and those were the records that I put out. And that's what I would do. I just, I didn't know about running a record company, but you just kind of go through, break down the steps. Well, you end up with the end product, and how do you get there? And so eventually, that I started racing bikes, and I was always a tremendous amount of focus, hard work, determination, and optimism. And those were kind of the 4 ingredients to everything that I did. And they generally yielded pretty extraordinary results. But I raced bikes for 6 years. And when I was 25, even the elite cyclists in the country, which I was in the Olympic trials in '88, but even the elite cyclists, you don't really earn much of a living, even today, unless you're the very top. And so even though I was having fun traveling around the country racing, I had to get a real job. And one of my teammates' girlfriends always had a nice car, and she was a loan officer. So she helped me get my real estate license, and I started in a phone room and answering calls, setting appointments for people to meet with loan officers. That was when I was 25. And within 6 months, I mean, this is all, I'm coming from zero. I knew nothing about real estate, but I knew how to work hard, and I knew how to listen and learn and ask. And so within 6 months, I was a top producer in the phone room, and pretty soon I was a loan officer, then branch manager. Then within 2 years, I broke off and started my own mortgage company. But then this was 92, and it was when the real estate market in California was really collapsing. So we were loaning money to guys like you who were buying properties at big discounts, and I see, hey, they're making extraordinary deals. So I said, I could probably do this. And so I bought 4 units in 2000, and this is 92, 4 units in 1992. A couple months later, I bought 19, and then I just bought bigger and bigger buildings, and I'd take them from, I'd always, again, buy the most challenged, really the cheapest, the ones where I can get the best deals, and that culminated in Los Angeles with me buying 298 units in downtown Los Angeles.
Just 298 units?
There was one building, 298 units, which was, and this is a funny story, but this will define exactly what I did. So this property had sold 6 years before for $4.5 million. And the owner, it was in very bad condition, so the owner got put in jail for slum violations at the property. So he sold it to another guy for $4 million. And that guy also went to jail. So then he sold it to the next guy who paid $2 million cash. And within 18 months, he was in jail. So now, literally no one wanted to buy this building. And here I come along, hey, let's make it a deal. So I bought it for $850,000, which is it's at 1002 East 7th Street, downtown Los Angeles. And it was just an extraordinary deal. But it was something, the broker was like, someone buy this thing. And I showed up, and I had done some pretty, I'd worked with a lot of the inspectors because I'd taken over some troubled projects. But when I was looking at this thing, the inspector said, just don't buy it. You've done pretty well. We're going to end up adversarial. Do not buy this thing. And of course, I bought it. And and we had a meeting right after I bought it. And the inspector said, hey, you have 6 months. We're going to be here every month. We're going to see what kind of progress you're making. But you got to get this thing done in 6 months, or we have no choice but to pursue criminal charges. And I said, no, I can get it done in 6 months. And I was making extraordinary progress, but at the end of 6 months, the inspectors kept coming by and saying, hey, you're doing a pretty good job. And I was thinking they were happy, but then on December 31st, this would be December 31st, 1998, a friend of mine called me and said, hey, you're in the paper. And I go, oh, for what? He says, 32 criminal charges filed against Redondo Beach man, and that was me. And, the first thing I thought about wasn't me, it was my parents. This was a Los Angeles Times, so pretty big daily, especially people used to read papers back then. And so I got in my car and I scrambled over to my parents' house and I looked for that newspaper, and luckily it was unopened. I grabbed the Metro section out, took it, and said bye. And I didn't really tell them about what was going on till it was over a couple of years later. And this was, but then I called my attorney and we worked out a deal with the city attorney and said, he said, hey, all reports are he's making good progress, but we can't selectively prosecute. We've jailed 3 people before, so we can't just say we're not going to jail this guy. So I had to pay it, but they didn't put me in jail. They said, as long as you continue to make progress, you pay a $10,000 fine and you're on probation. And so I was on probation for 3 years. Now the good news, it's summary probation, which means as long as you stay out of trouble, you don't have to show up and go to a probation officer or anything like that. But then, the end of that story is 10 months later, I finished that building, and I had to come up with one day where all these inspectors, plumbing, electrical, building, health, can all go through the building and not find a single violation. And that was a challenge. We had 2 false starts, but then one day they came through and they could not find a single violation. They signed off on the property, and I shortly thereafter sold it for $2.5 million. And so I made about $1 million on the deal, and I said, okay, I can do. I'm
the greatest person in the world.
It was really a mixed blessing. I thought I could take on any project that anyone or everyone else had failed at, and I could be the one to get it right. And that had happened on that time, but then I started saying, okay, well, the real estate market in California was rebounding, so let me go out of state, and I would be buying. I'd look for the most challenged situations, and then my next big building was I bought 233 units in downtown Kansas City. HUD auction, courthouse steps, paid $1.6 million. I put about $1 million into it, and then this time I kept it, but Wells Fargo made me a $5 million loan. So I netted just over $2 million on that. Okay, I'm saying, let's look for more challenges. And, I bought other buildings, but then eventually it all culminated in Woodland Meadows, where I bought this thing for 13.5, and it was nicknamed Uzi Alley, for Uzi the gun, because there had been 8 murders at the property in the prior year. And so again, most people didn't want to buy this. I was able to buy it, and one of the things I did, which was I'm really cheap. And that was actually helped a little bit of an ingredient to success. But when I flew out of town and owned a property in Kansas City, Oklahoma City, these different cities, Indianapolis, I didn't want to pay for a hotel. I own a property which typically had vacant units, so I'm going to stay at the property. So I moved this one Uzi Alley. I moved in to one of the units there, and it was front page of the paper. Hey, this guy just moved into the Uzi Alley, and it was. I mean, the good news is most people thought, well, if he's willing to move there, I mean, he's probably really going to be he has a decent chance of actually turning this thing around, and so that's. So the message, I mean, to all of you, I would really think, I mean, the real rewards are buying those just extraordinarily distressed properties, whatever the situation is. Doesn't have to be residential, doesn't have to be low income, high income, but something where there's a big problem that you can work hard to solve.
Well, I mean, it's high risk, high reward, right? I don't like you do well beyond what I would ever think of doing. I'm the boring person, right? I'm cool with boring, don't really want to, take on too much risk, because sometimes it does pay off and you make $1 million, right? And sometimes it backfires. So if we can get into that a little bit, but I'm guessing one of the first REI lessons you're going to tell us about is don't buy a building that's called Uzi Alley, right? or any sort of gun reference to your property. So I'm assuming it was C-class.
Yeah, it was. Well, here's what was fascinating about the property. It was C-class. It had Section 8, the contract where 40% of the units, so 440 units, had a project-based contract. So HUD would pay us each month. We had $200,000 coming in just from the project-based contract, and our only thing with those is keep them habitable, keep them in good shape, and then we had the other 600 units which we rented to market-rate tenants, which included a lot of vouchers. But what was fascinating about the property is it backed in to Bexley, which is one of the highest income neighborhoods in Columbus, and it was it wasn't, it was surrounded by some pretty nice properties. It fronted a main street. It was half a mile from the Columbus airport, so there were a lot of big pluses about the land. It was also one of the biggest pieces of land in Columbus, 54 acres, and so it was something that was well located, and that was a big advantage, I think, to the property, made it desirable for tenants.
So was the plan originally to do I know you're probably doing a value add, was it like a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan? Like, what was your initial thoughts with that property? You're right, it's backing up next to a really nice neighborhood, being close to airport, right? All things that are prime for value add.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, there was a lot of value to be added. So first was to stabilize it.
Before it, can you just explain value add real quick in case people in the audience don't know what we mean by when we say that?
Sure. So I bought the property for $13.5 million. There was an appraisal that once I got the repairs done, I think it was worth $26 million. So I just had to do the repairs, and in theory, it would be worth $26 million. And so you're adding value. You're not just buying it at a price of $13.5. I'm going to just leave it as is. It's going to stay at $13.5, or the market will indicate any prospective fluctuations in price. Here, you're buying it cheap, you can add value, and you can increase that value. So this one, I went about rehabbing the property. We had really good success, and big thing about what I learned about these properties is there's oftentimes, because most of them had low to moderate income tenants, was that a lot of people paint it with a broad brush saying, that they're all troublemakers there. But in reality, lots of times there's a handful of troublemakers, and you really need to focus on getting them out. And once you get them out, the rest of the tenants, who by and large are just trying to live their lives, will will rise to the top, and then you can get more tenants like that. And the police will often, or at least my experience was, when they had an ally in the landlord who's trying to do the right thing, they will help. And they don't like it when it's an absentee landlord that doesn't take care of problems, and that's, kind of, you get the opposite, you start getting notices. So this was something where I was very aggressive in trying to get rid of the troublemakers. And part of the problem was that we'd go up, the groups of guys and girls, but mostly young men on the corners, and we would just hanging out, and that's it's a deterrent. And we would, we'd say, hey, what are you doing? We can't have you here. It's a problem. What can we do? This can't work. And they'd temporarily move a couple of blocks, but then they'd be back. And finally, the thing was, a few guys would say, well, give me a job. And you say, yeah. I mean, it wasn't in my agenda to give the tenants jobs, but then it became such you recognize that so many of these low to moderate income communities, there just aren't that many jobs available to them. And so we came up with this idea that we would hire tenants, and we would partner them with some of the construction crews, some of the contractors who would use them as apprentices and labor and whatnot. But we said, well, we're not just going to just say contractor, tenant, work together. We started this teach class, which was 2 weeks. And basically, we told everybody who would show up, we said, if you show up for 2 weeks on time, you stay the whole time, you're guaranteed to get a job. And then we'd have the contractors in, and they'd speak about different trades and just share personal stories of maybe some adversity or some successes that they had had. And it actually, the first couple of days, there were like 2 or 3 people showing up, so it wasn't very many. But once those guys got jobs, all of a sudden, like, dozens of people were showing up, and many of them had never had a job, many of them had criminal records, and but now and some of them were the drug dealers on the corners, and they were trading in their life for something that was perceived as better and really was. And what I just loved spiritually was that now, instead of paying money to contractors who were then taking the money at the end of the day and going out to the suburbs, and that's where they'd spend it, this money, at least a good portion of our multi-million-dollar rehab budget, was staying within the property, was strengthening the families, and was making them better able to pay their rent and getting rid of some of the problems. Some of the the buildings that used to be tagged all the time, now some of these guys were doing the painting, and someone started tagging. Wait, I just did that. And so it really transformed the property. And so this was, by all accounts, a huge success, Woodland Meadows. And we actually had an accommodation from the Ohio House of Representatives where they said, you took Uzi Alley, you gave jobs to hundreds of predominantly young African-American males who often they have a very high unemployment rate, and we were able to give them jobs, give them employments. And what's beautiful end of the story is, even though the project ended up tragically for me, many of those young men have taken their experience there and started construction companies, and now 10, 20 years later, they are still succeeding.
So what happened? I mean, I'm a big believer in karma, right? Karma is totally on your side. What happened?
Huh.
You would just think, man, you're doing all this stuff, right? Your chips are pretty high on this good side. Oh, what went wrong?
So here's, December 24th, 2003, the manager of the property called me, and I was at home in Los Angeles with my parents and siblings, and he said, hey, there was an ice storm out here, and the property's in really bad shape. And I was, I grew up in California, so you're thinking ice storm, I mean, they don't have ice storms in California, and you're thinking, well, how bad can that be? But I flew back the next day, the day after Christmas, and the property, here's what had happened. Ice storm resulted in temperatures were negative 8 degrees outside. The ice storm came through and knocked out power to 60% of Columbus, and including all of our property. All 122 buildings had no power. Now, the problem is that we had boilers. We used radiant heat, so these boilers would pump hot water through all the units, and when the power went out, the boiler stopped working. So now we had no electricity and no heat in we had close to 900 families living there, and times, probably average of 3 people. That was 3,000 people there. And so they had no heat, no electricity, and then all those pipes, that water with no heat started freezing. So this is the domestic heat, the domestic water and the boiler. So we were in a V's. We didn't have, so I arrived, and you look around, there's trees down everywhere, there's power poles down everywhere, there's, and so it was bad. The good news is the Red Cross opened a shelter at the church across the street, but then the temperature started rising, and then all those pipes throughout the property started bursting. And we had these subterranean units. They were, how some of those buildings where the windows are right, you look out the window and there's the ground, so it's right there. So all the water from the second and third floor would then flow down, and these things had like 3 or 4 feet of water. It was an astounding situation for me. It was extraordinary. The first time I had something that I didn't really know what to do, except I did. I thought, well, one thing is we have $50 million in insurance.
I was going to say, what about insurance?
So you call your insurance company. But here's something I never knew. I had probably a couple insurance claims in my life, pretty small stuff, and now you're saying, hey, this property, this is going to be a huge loss. And what I didn't know is that insurance companies, when there's a huge loss, they're going to find every excuse to not pay. So this insurance company came out here like 2 days later, property just devastated. And they go back, the guy looks around, and then he calls me back the next day and says, hey, you're not covered. And I said, okay.
What do you mean?
Yeah, how am I not covered? I'm paying like $300,000 a year on the policy. And they said, hey, you don't have boiler endorsements. This damage was all caused by the boilers. You didn't have endorsements. As a result, you're not covered. And I said, well, the state had just been here in October, 2.5 months before, had inspected all the boilers, signed off, they were all operational. The reason the boilers didn't work is because there was no power. And, but we're not paying. And so so I learned, I've been humbled. You learn that you need to, in those cases, you need to file a lawsuit against the insurance company. And so I go to an attorney, he says, we have a great case. They're gonna pay you. It's just a matter of time. And so with that advice, I said, okay, let's file the lawsuit, which we did. We were in litigation, we filed the lawsuit just a couple months after the storm. And then I thought, okay, well, we still had all these problems, so we had to fix them. So I started borrowing money. I had, at that point, a lot of good properties around the country. So I started borrowing money on all those properties, thinking, okay, pretty soon I'm going to get this insurance settlement. I can pay back all that money and all those loans, and I'm going to be back to normal. Everything's going to be great. And the problem is that come November, we still don't have the insurance claim, and the insurance matter settled. And the city came out and said, I had been making progress, but at that point I ran out of money in August. I just couldn't borrow anymore, and it was taking longer than I thought. And the city came out, and I had no idea about this, but they said, okay, this property, low-income property, back into this high-income neighborhood, someone there in the city decided we want that property and we don't want it to be low-income housing anymore. And so they came out and they issued evacuation notices. They said that this property needs to be evacuated within 3 days. And for what reason? Well, because we've identified, now that you've had to strip out these first floor units and strip them down to the studs, we've identified a construction shortcut by a prior contractor that renders these buildings all subject to imminent collapse. Now, I hired an engineer, and the engineer came out here, did all his calculations, and said they're not subject to imminent collapse. And so, 3 days are ticking. I had to hire an attorney, or use my same attorney. We went to court, and we got a temporary restraining order against the city, saying that you can't evacuate this building. And I'm there with my engineer saying they're not subject to imminent collapse. And the city's saying, and so the judge is saying, well, city, why do you think they're subject to imminent collapse? Well, it looks like that. They had no engineer, no studies, nothing. So the judge gave us a TRO.
Sounds like Chicago, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally sounds like Chicago.
And so we had, part of the TRO, the judge said, okay, well, what's going on here? How do we get this thing fixed so the city's also satisfied? And They said, how soon can you have everything done here? And I said, 6 months. And then as soon as I got out of court, I called my attorney and said, call that insurance company, make the best deal you can, and we're done with this. And the insurance company settled for $32 million, which by all accounts is just an extraordinary amount of money. But in the end, the damages were more or less $45 million. And so I was short, but worse, now I said, okay, I got this insurance money. We had 200 people a day at the property, working on the property, spending all this money. But the city wasn't done. They had decided that even though I got the temporary restraining order, they were going to find another way to get this property. So they went to HUD and asked, there was a meeting between the HUD and the city, and then the HUD came out here and said, hey, if you had contracts on the property, you have 30 days to fix all this damage, which I just agreed in a court order that I get done in 6 months. And so I said, well, there's no way I can get it done in 30 days, but look at all the people here. We're making huge progress. And so I went back to the judge. We went back to the judge and said, hey, HUD is saying they're going to pull our contracts because they're saying 30 days. You gave us 6 months. The judge ordered HUD to show up in court. And the day of the hearing, HUD said, we're not bound by municipal court. We're a federal agency. We're not showing up. And 30 days passed. They terminated the contracts. And at that point, all that money that had been pumped in there, the city did everything they could to ensure that I failed. And
sounds like Chicago.
Yeah, eventually the city owns the property. And I had to write a book about all this bad things that happened called burn zones. And when I did a book signing in Columbus about 3 years ago in 2015, and this guy came up to me who worked as a city inspector and said, hey, we were told no matter what you did, we had to fail you. And so in those resulting 2 years, I lost Woodland Meadows to the city. They own it to this day. All those other properties that I borrowed money on, I lost those too. And I had personal guarantees and all this that my big empire that I built through a lot of hard work and long days and nights ended up just collapsing. So that is what happened, and it was.
Cue me crying in a corner for like 4 years.
Yeah, it was challenging for a couple of years. I mean, you mentioned earlier. This is going to be kind of. So you mentioned earlier on the prior panel that you would show potential investors your credit report. Because you have good credit, it would reflect that you were an upstanding citizen. Now, I had a couple of years where I was just like, what do I do? But then, now I had no money, so I had to go and get investors. So they would also run my credit report and my background check. And at that point,
jailed.
They actually, I was arrested. It was all for show, but I was arrested for not showing up at a court hearing, and I didn't get the notice. But they arrested me, and it was big front page news. And I have no criminal record, but they did. It did make the front page of the paper, which is, the city. They'll do everything to get what they want, and they did in this case. But so now I had, there's stories on the internet of me being arrested. I had tens of millions of dollars in judgments against me. I had terrible credit. I had no money, and now I'm going to, capital sources saying, hey, I have this project. Can you finance it? And that didn't work so well. So I had to come up with an alternate. What am I going to do with my life? And so we didn't have you here just to talk about this awful story and how you just gave up, right? Yeah.
You've bounced back tenfold. So why don't you tell us about how that transpired? Because it's a really great story.
Sure. So, dealing with creditors when you owe millions of dollars and whatnot, I owed KeyBank. I had a judgment against me for $6 million. They were, and on down the line for several creditors that I owed millions of dollars to, and then down to like my personal credit cards where I owed $5,000. At some point, I couldn't pay anything. And but this was all happening in 2005 and 2006, and I was just kind of trying to keep everything, me just going. And at the end of 2007 is when the whole, everybody else, families across America started getting, you hear about foreclosures, people struggling with their mortgages. And so I came up with the idea of creating a a nonprofit which would help families at risk of foreclosure. And that started in 2007. We opened our office in early 2008. And we had thousands of clients coming to us, and these were homeowners across America struggling with their mortgages. And we would go one by one to Bank of America, Ocwen, Wells Fargo, and try to advocate for them to get solutions to keep them in their homes. And what was remarkable is that many times the banks and lenders servicers were just not very receptive to solutions that in many cases were not only good for the homeowners, but were also good for the lenders. So we had thousands come to us, we helped about 10%, and we said this isn't really working like we had hoped. We helped a few hundred families, but then we said, the problem here is the lenders and servicers, we need to get them out of this equation. So what we did is we figured we're not going to just go on behalf of Bree and say, hey, we need to help Bree. We just need to go to the banks and say, we want to buy your mortgages from people that aren't paying. And that's what we did. And it took a while to figure out how to do that, but eventually we did start, it's American Homeowner Preservation as a company. We started buying these mortgages, and we'd buy them at big discounts. Once again, we were primarily in low to moderate income neighborhoods, which are kind of out of favor with some of the bigger hedge funds that buy these notes. So we were able to buy big discounts, and we took a page from those banks and servicers. All the things they did wrong, we would do right. We would go to the homeowners and say, hey, we're going to cut your principal, we're going to cut your payments, we're going to forgive a big chunk of your delinquency. And in doing all the things that I wish when I was deep in debt, people would come to me and say, hey, you owe $6 million, you got to pay. And well, I don't have $6 million, so I can't pay it. But if you come to me and say, hey, we bought your $6 million debt for $100,000 or $200,000, which is really what it trades for when it's like a judgment like that, they would, and if you pay us $10,000 a month for the next 3 years or $5,000 a month, something where they can make some money and I can get rid of this debt, that's when I was receptive. So we use that, and we'd go to homeowners and say, we weren't asking them for their financials or their hardship letters or trying to determine how much they can pay. We just, based on what we paid, we can make a reasonable return, what we paid for their mortgage, we can make a reasonable return if their new payment is $400 a month. So we would say we can drop your payment from $800 to $400. We can forgive your $20,000 delinquency if you give us $2,000 or write off the difference. And that worked really well, and we started having some extraordinary returns, and we've grown. Right now, last year, in our most recent fund, it's been going about a year and a half, we bought about 2,500 mortgages. Right now, we raise, for all those years where I had trouble raising money, right now, money comes in faster than we can deploy it. And so it's, and now, the next step in the evolution is the problem as a fund that buys these mortgages. In all these states across the country, what we need to do is we need to work with a servicer who's licensed in that state in order to communicate with the borrower. So we're kind of quarterbacking these servicers, and they're not great. We've kind of made it so it works, but finally we said, we're just going to become our own servicer. So all those things that we saw being done, we think, poorly by Ocwen, Bank of America, and Wells, we could do that better. So we're in the process of becoming licensed across the country as a servicer, and we think we have huge potential in that. And I'll tell you another real footnote to that is I recognized last year that I always work really hard. I don't delegate that well. I don't I'm not that good at building a team or inspiring a team. I'm good at building and inspiring myself. So
you're the executor.
Yeah, I do it. But you can't build a company like that. At some point, you have to. I mean, my wife. It's almost unfair sometimes the amount of hours that I've worked to her. Probably to me too, but I only feel for her. So I recognized this last year. I said, the company is doing very well, but how do I get big? How do I make American Homeowner Preservation into an institution? How do I get it to be a publicly traded company? How do I get 1,000 employees instead of 25? And I realized that the problem was me, that I'm the one that is constraining the company because I was the CEO, and I needed to find somebody who could build, manage, and get the most out of a team. And so I hired somebody from a publicly traded servicer who wanted to be part of our mission, and she's now at the helm. She left Wintrust, and she is at the helm building our new servicer, and we see great prospects in that, and that can work a little bit less.
So real quick, George had a Note Buyers Boot Camp downtown Chicago a few weeks ago. And I was lucky enough to go down there, and I said, I don't know much about notes. I thought notes was like, hey, if I ever sell my properties and decide to not be a landlord, I'm gonna do something passive, like notes. And so I went down to your boot camp and was there for a few hours. I walked away knowing a couple of things. A, notes is not passive at all.
It's not.
But B, I got to listen to how your company was being developed, and I walked away being like, I would do the exact same way, because you guys are doing things, like you said, you're watching what everyone else does wrong and doing it better. And one of the things that I was really quite surprised with, I forget her name, but said that they go and knock on doors, right? Because these people, there's a shame when it's like, hey, we owe debt, we're being foreclosed on. And it seemed like they were really trying to communicate, like, listen, we're not just some big bank who's looking to take you out of your home, right? We want to talk with you, like, here's our information, let's figure out something that works for both of us. And you guys have quite a high success rate.
We do. Our returns are very high. We just filed our audit for last year. We made 40% our returns in our fund. We filed with the SEC. We're 40%. The year before, we're 39%. So we make exceptional returns. But the homeowners look at what we do as charitable. I mean, they're sometimes they think it's too good to be true. They think it's a scam because we're dropping their payments or their principal so much. But it's really because there's an opportunity. So very similar to all those, when I bought the properties that no one else wanted, now we're buying the mortgages that no one else wants. These are the loans, low to moderate income neighborhoods. Just the big Wall Street funds just do not want this stuff. They see it as very high risk, low return. And I mean, the reality is we probably average making $5,000 to $10,000 per mortgage. But if you do that thousands of times, now you actually have a real business. So that's our intention, is to generate a good return, but really have a positive social impact on these communities.
So now looking back, I mean, you went 4,000 units is a ton, right? Probably as much as most of us here, would dream to have. So to go from 4,000 units to $26 million in debt, to now back where you are, which is, way above and beyond what you were at before. Looking back at all of that, like, what would you have done differently, if anything?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm good at what I do right now because of what I went through. So yeah, maybe that's me deceiving myself, saying that all that bad stuff that happened, it happened for a reason. I mean, it sounds cliche, but it did give me expertise and a perspective that has served me well in my current roles. So I guess the biggest thing is I kept moving forward, because at that time it was really shattering, and it's not just me. I felt probably the least for me. It's like people around me, loved ones, my parents. At the time, I remember one of my cousins sent this article about me getting arrested to my dad, and my dad was like, "Oh, what's going on?" And that was probably the biggest, the interactions with my families. I mean, they always stood by me, and they were always there. But I felt bad for any stress that they felt as a result of the challenges that I faced. It was shattering for me too. I mean, when this was all happening, I was always in reasonably good health, and I started grinding my teeth, and you'd wake up at night and your teeth were just like clenched together. My teeth were clenched together, and right now I'm pretty healthy except for my teeth. I lost some enamel, and I have some gum problems as a result of that. So those are things that it's hard to say, is that worth sacrificing some of your health for what went, but it's what happened. I've learned from it, and I made the best of it. And what would I have done differently? I mean, I guess the only thing I could do is take less risks, but it's then I wouldn't have gotten to the point where I could have taken that big risk. So in retrospect, I have to say I probably wouldn't have done anything differently.
That's incredible. I mean, if you notice, there's been a lot of consistent themes today. And one of them is, it's okay to make mistakes, right? And any successful investor has lost money. Every single one of us has lost money at some point. It's how you grow from it, it's how you learn from it, and it's how you move forward. So if you have any advice for like newer investors that are, maybe scared to buy property now, besides have your insurance double checked, what else advice would you offer to investors?
So especially investors who are just on the on the starting line saying, hey, do I do this or do I not do this? You have to do it. You need to actually do it, win or lose, make the best of it, and then, as you said, learn from any mistakes that you make. In reality, the market right now is very strong. It's also strong for notes. It's strong for real estate as well. I'd almost, right now, I'd do some modest-sized deals. I'd look for those. I mean, if it were me, I'd look for those high-risk deals, because you really, in my mind, if you're willing to work hard and put the effort into it, you control your risk a lot better than buying something kind of that's priced near retail, and then you're at the mercy of whatever happens with the market. And so if you can do that or any kind of value-add deal now, and once the market crashes, I mean, today everybody's running towards real estate. You really want to be running the opposite direction of everybody. So in 2008, 9, 10, when the real estate market was collapsing, most people ran to the sidelines, and maybe it makes sense, but there were huge opportunities then. Those will return. It's a cycle that repeats itself, and at some point that returns, and at that point you dive in. It's going to be tougher to get financing, but you want to have the experience, know what you're doing, and maximize your gains in those troubled times.
Yeah, I mean, in all the years I've been doing this, and all the investors I've talked to on the phone, not in person, obviously, and podcasts and national conferences, I think the one attribute I've noticed that every successful investor has is self-reflection. Being able to look back on what they've done, good and bad, and learn from it. And that's really true, I think, with you as well.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to make the best of your losses and learn from them. I mean, and just don't keep making the same mistake, which, I mean, unfortunately, it's easy to fall into bad habits, or fall into habits that aren't ideal. But look at yourself, be disciplined, and I mean, everybody, when I was a kid, you just think, God, if somebody else can do something, then why can't I do it? And at this point, I didn't mention it, but I dropped out of high school, not in a bad way, but I dropped out to become an entrepreneur to grow my record company. So
the 80s punk rock.
With the 80s punk rock bands, yeah. So you have so high school dropout. So there's no college degree. At this point, I still have bad credit. I still have a few judgments out there, and I'm raising. I'm able to build. You can do a lot of stuff despite the obstacles. So what you need to do, I think, is look at not what you don't have, which is very easy to say, well, I'd love to do this if only I had the education, the experience, the money, the diploma, whatever, and just what do you have, and go forward with that, and then find other people to help fill the things that you don't have.
Awesome. We have maybe time for a couple of quick questions. Is there a mic around? Got it. Anyone have questions? You guys are really bad with questions today. What is going on?
Tactically speaking, if you were presented a similar opportunity, like the one in Columbus, what tactically would you do with the deal structure, your approach? I know you wouldn't, I know you were thinking if you would do it again or not. That's kind of a different thing, but just specifically within the deal, what would you do differently?
I mean, the ingredients that the strategies that I had worked out really well. Engage the community. I mean, so it's not just you, the owner, going in and making money off this community. If you can help improve that community, huge deal. And it's not just, hey, we have services, we have whatnot. Get them involved in your rehab. Get them involved. And by the time we were within a year of that property of Woodland Meadows, we had all the office workers were tenants at the property. A lot of the crews, the maintenance guys worked at the property. We fired the police. All the armed security was gone, and we had a community patrol, which is all made up of residents. So those types of things, I think, are big ingredients to transforming these communities. And if you can transform it, then you can, that's when you're adding value. The money-wise deal structure, we used, by the time we got to bigger projects, I was using municipal bonds and tax credits, which are available on projects of $5 million plus in general. So you could use that as different ingredients. Google it, you'll find it's, again, I didn't know anything about it. I just Googled it, or I just asked people at that point and learned how to do it. But I mean, if I were younger, 20 years ago, I mean, it's a way to you can make millions of dollars doing this, and those opportunities, I'm certain, are still available. It's just the same thing. Everybody's looking at the easy ones and leaving these ones off to the side. Does that answer it well? Or okay?
Yeah, that was an iffy. He's kind of giving a half smile over there. You good? What other questions do we have?
I missed it, but how did you get your capital to start buying the notes?
How to get the capital to start buying notes? So I brokered deals for a while, real estate broker. So I used the commissions. Initially, we started using that to buy notes. It was just my own earnings. And then I brought other investors in, mostly private parties and friends and family, and then it grew to other private parties. Now we actually crowdfund the money. So you can go online to ahpfund.com. And you can invest as little as $100. We get money. We can accept investments from accredited and non-accredited investors. And we have, we have institutional funds that are investing, and we have homeowners who we've actually helped who want to support the mission. They also invest. So it's again, it's trying to engage the community as much as possible on all sides.
Given your nature and given your journey and the black swan nature of what you experienced in Ohio, did you ever foresee yourself getting back into property?
It would be really tough. I have a business right now which I can scale and work behind a desk doing. So it would be difficult for me to do it the way I was doing it. There's no way. I have to tell my wife would never let me do it, and she's probably right. She's probably looking out for me in doing that. At that point, I was single. You could do, yeah.
I was going to ask if you were married and you brought your wife to live in Uzi Alley with you.
No, but at the end, I met her. Long story. I met her, right at the tail end of Uzi Alley, and so she was there for all the bad times, and then she stuck with me. And now she's part of the better times.
George, did you continue training in cycling during the years after your professional or semi-domestic pro tour while you were building your businesses?
No, I tried for one season. I was sponsored, and I was working full-time and sponsored, and I just couldn't. I couldn't keep my results up. So.
Even recreational, just for general fitness?
It's funny. For whatever reason, I'm highly competitive. So knowing I could race here and then not doing the training and just going out for fun, I couldn't do it. And so eventually I started running, which was more anonymous, and I still run today.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem.
Got time for maybe two more questions?
One, I wanted to say that's an amazing story. So that was actually very inspirational. So what kept you going, though? So one thing would you say that kept you to get through that mess?
I don't know. I'm really a big optimist. I mean, almost to a fault. So I kept thinking. I never filed bankruptcy. I could have, but I just couldn't. To me, it was admitting failure. I just couldn't do it, and instead I just dealt with things as they came up. And because I always thought things would turn around, I didn't want a bankruptcy on my record. And so I think being optimistic in even the worst situations, like thinking if you keep going. I mean, here's, I used to race bikes, so there'd always be like what I call the burn zones, which is how I named the book. Mm-hmm. You'd go through these sections in life, these portions of your life, which really is where you succeed or you fail. And it's usually the extraordinarily trying times. And if you can get to it's just getting to the other side and enduring and staying focused, relaxed, breathing. And so that was like a long burn zone, but it was something where I just kept looking forward, hoping there'd be something better. And you really created, in some respects, created it myself.
Thanks.
I mean, and hopefully at this point, like that's probably like the worst, right? So whatever else comes up, it's just not going to be that bad.
Yeah, exactly.
It probably helps put things in perspective for you. Yeah, Lumi, I know, wanted to ask a question.
I have a different type of question, a mindset. Through the ups and downs, through the seasons, right, when not much is happening, who are your mentors? Who are you trading ideas with? And what's the book or books or what you're reading that takes you from here to there?
You know, I have to admit, even though I should, I buy a lot of books, and I really don't read the majority of them, and I have to admit, I'm terrible about it. I'll read, I'm really good at Google. Anytime I want to learn something, I go on Google and I'm intently like searching through articles and stories to try to figure out, I don't understand this, how am I going to learn it? And I've even, before maybe it was more books or just calling people and asking them. I mean, it's amazing what you can learn by simply asking. And when I don't know something, I pick up the phone and call or email, but really call, you get immediate feedback. And if people call me and pick up the phone and they ask me some question, as long as it's not like going on forever, I answer the question and okay, great. What would you do in this situation? Okay, and you're done. So I think that was more just calling friends, family, and people that honestly people that I didn't know, and just reaching out to them. I mean, today I'd reach out to people on LinkedIn and hey, I like to talk. Can you schedule a quick 50-minute call? And people are pretty free with their advice. So that's how I learn. There's a lot of good books. For whatever reason, maybe I'm impatient, and so to get through a whole book sometimes is trouble for me. Sorry.
How did you write your book then?
Oh, God. So it was like a goal. I had to get this thing done. I thought I'd do it in a few months, and it took over a year. And like it was a part-time job. I was doing it weekends, nights, but writing the book was. A lot of people have read it and enjoyed it, but and said they found inspiration in it. But the one who benefited the most in that book was me. It was really an opportunity for me to go back at that challenge time in my life and look at what had happened. And the reality is that as I wrote, there were times I was laughing and there were times that I was crying, and it was just a release to look at all that happened. And clearly I made mistakes. There's things I could have done differently, and that may have yielded a better result. But it was something, and I see patterns. The book goes through my whole life, so I kind of see, all this optimism, hard work. Sometimes it's misplaced. The reality is, even when sometimes I just didn't take a step back and say, hey, maybe I shouldn't be quite so optimistic. So I think the book was a very therapeutic process, which I enjoyed doing.
I always said if I wrote a book, I just need to record myself talking for 20 hours and have someone else write it. Because no one would buy it because it would be all misspelled and punctuation would be everywhere. It would be awful. So what do you think was the most, you've done a lot of really spiritually, emotionally rewarding things. What do you think was the most rewarding thing that you've done so far? I mean, really, I guess I'm most proud of Woodland Meadows, that Teach program. I mean, some of these men and women, but just have transformed their lives. And the ability, I think the loss of Woodland Meadows, the greatest loss was that it was a showcase for these men and something on an ongoing basis that we could have replicated across the country. And that was something that you just see it I saw it every day. And the great news is when I did the book, we went back and I had someone interview a lot of these people, and they came back with some really extraordinary stories of how they have changed their lives for the better forever. Wonderful. I think we're done with questions. I think there was one more right there. Charlie, can you?
On a much less scale, many of us are up against City Hall and the villages and the unjust system and just the vagaries. Can you give us insight as to how you would fight that problem again? Is it because you weren't connected? Was this a political thing that you could have fought, or and what has the city done with it? And did you interview them again? And did they get their just desserts?
Well, the good news is the mayor at the time, Mayor Michael Coleman, he was later he was investigated by the FBI for corruption. He wasn't found guilty or anything like that, but his underlings, his chief of staff, some of the other people did either have to resign or other things. But so I guess all the things that I experienced, there was some elements up there that were doing bad things, and how to fight it. I mean, I guess I fought it, and the problem is, in retrospect, maybe fighting it wasn't the best thing. I'll tell you there was one trigger. You'll always look like the one thing that I did wrong. The city, and this was in the front page of the newspaper, the city mayor summoned me to City Hall and said, bring all your tax returns, we want to see your reserves, all this kind of stuff. And then, so I showed up, and I met, and we went through everything. We had, at that point, I was still doing okay. And they said, hey, you have this HUD contract, you have these millions of dollars in tax credits that you earned on this. Is there any way to move them to another property? And I was tunnel vision that I was going to rebuild Woodland Meadows. So I was saying, I can't do it. But I think that was their opportunity. If I had said, hey, I'm willing to widen my lens and say maybe I can move this, maybe if they were supporting me to do that, that would have maybe worked. So I suppose if the city comes at you with a problem, and maybe in that case they were also coming to me with a solution, which I didn't take, then shortly thereafter, looking back, is where they became adversarial. They said, okay, if he's not going to work with us, then we're going to work against him. So that's something which they would have gotten the property that they wanted, and they would have helped facilitate all this government financing contracts would have helped go to another property. So I would say if you get in trouble with the city, or you need to work with the city, I mean, it really does. They're people, and if you can work with them or you be cooperative, generally that's what I did up until this point, up until Woodland Meadows, and it worked out very well. Be proactive. They love to hear from you. They oftentimes, I mean, the police, if you're hiding or they can't find you is where things go really bad.
Yeah, also all the cops in my areas all have my number. And they know, like, it's only happened, I think, maybe once in the 5 years I've been up there, but, like, they know to call me. You know, call me directly if something's going on, like, and I will have it taken care of. I want to know. And they're generally very easy to work with. Same with Chicago. But again, you know, if Chicago wants you to take your building, you know, they're going to take your building. Yep. Regardless of what you do or don't do or fight, it's going to happen. Well, thank you so much for your time. Round of applause, please.
Thank you.